ETL, like Zapier and Integromat, that's the sort of thing that I'll start with first. And then after that, we'll give just a demo of how you can do two-way real-time data syncing with no-code tools across Airtable and Webflow. Feel free to cut me off at any time if you have questions. I'll just go through this, but truly just like put it in the chat or just shout it out, and happy to stop there. But yeah, maybe just before I jump in, anything else, Adam, that would be useful to cover?
No, that's cool. There might be some folk in the room who are interested in maybe sort of the journey you've had as a founder, and just, you know, how you found like the likes of Y Combinator and things like that. But again, that can maybe come up through the Q&A. But if you've got any, you know, any info there, that would be super interesting as well. But yeah, no, that's,
I think that's a good place to start, because it actually ties into the actual discussion. But yeah, just very quickly. So prior to starting Whalesync, I've been working in product for a few different startups. So I was a product manager for a VR startup early on, eventually for a company called MakeSpace. And then along the way, I've just been building with these no-code tools back when, I'm sure many of you remember, no-code wasn't even really a term. And I was using a stack, you know, similar to probably a lot of you guys, Airtable, Webflow, Zapier. Before that, things like Wix and Weebly. And when we started, my co-founder and I started this company, we were actually not really thinking about the back end of the no-code stack at all. We were thinking about the front end, things like Stacker and Webflow, and we were trying to recreate that. We started talking to a lot of no-coders and trying to get their feedback. And the thing that kept coming up was people wanted to move data between Airtable and Webflow, and they were using Zapier to do that. And Zapier is an amazing tool. We're customers of it, but it was just a crazy thing that people were like architecting these, you know, 10, 15, 20 steps apps just to try to really copy data from one database in Airtable to another database in Webflow. And we just saw this so many times that we said, you know what, we need to make, there must be a better way to do this. And so, you know, this isn't really what automation tools were built to do. That's sort of how we stumbled into Whalesync, and my co-founder and I eventually decided to go the venture-backed route. But cool. So I guess with that as the context, I'm going to share my screen. I'll get right into the presentation here. Again, feel free to stop me at any time. Let's just open this up. So high-level overview here. So this is the state of no-code data sync 2022. I guess we'll have to update it in another month or so. But basic idea here to give you a quick overview. Just spoke about my background, so we'll go into that very quickly. But then really just teasing apart what is the difference between automations and syncing. Give a high-level overview of the different categories of data syncing, and then explain what exactly are automation tools, what are they good for, what are native integrations, what are they good for, same for ETL, vertical sync, and finally true data sync, which is what I would say Whalesync is working on. So just again, very quickly, this is myself and my co-founder, Curtis, and yeah, we're building Whalesync two-way real-time data syncing. So the interesting part, right, that I mentioned, automations versus sync. So when I say automations, I'm thinking about tools like Zapier, Make, N8N, right? Ones that you're probably all familiar with. And so when we think about the no-code automation stack, it is a tool that is really flexible and lets you create if this then that statements, right? So this is from Zapier's website, and it essentially shows you what an automation tool is good for. When I'm assigned a new task in Jira, add it to my to-do list, and then send me a Slack the next day, right? You can chain these together and create really complex workflows. Syncing, which is slightly different, and again, the terms get thrown around a lot, is less about creating these complex workflows and more about actually just sharing sets of data between two or more tools, right? So here, this is from our website. This is trying to explain, you've got data in Notion, you've got data in Shopify, let's say you have products, for example, right? And you want them to just be the same across the two. You can try to architect some sort of automation to, like, when Notion gets updated, then update Shopify, and then if Shopify gets updated, come back to Notion, and then, you know, create the reference fields and things like that. And that's sort of what we were seeing originally, that led us to think that we could build a better tool here. And so that is the main split there. So as a high-level overview of data syncing in the no-code world, we've broken it down into 5 different categories. So automation tools, which we just talked about, native integrations, So that's something like Airtable sync, right? Things that are built into Airtable or Notion, right? That are pulling data from other tools into theirs. And again, we'll go into each one of these specifically. So if this is unclear, hopefully that'll become a little more clear in the next few minutes. ETL. So this is typically a developer-focused term. We'll get into that. Vertical syncing, right? So if you guys are familiar with things like FinSuite's Noble, this would be data syncing, but specifically just between one or two tools. And then finally, true data sync. So that is multi-directional two-way sync across multiple different tools. So starting with number 4, so automation tools. Like I mentioned, Make, Zapier, Parabola, even, right? This is probably what you're already really familiar with. If this, then that statements. These are very much built for no-coders for the most part. There are some low-code ones, but really these are meant to give non-developers access to APIs so you can create these automations. This is almost always going to be one-way syncing. And when I say sync, one-way pushes really from one tool to the next. And then finally, the benefit of these is that they typically have tons of different integrations. So you look at Zapier, they've got, I think, over 4,000 or 5,000 integrations at this point. So you can really connect anything to anything with these sort of simple one-way pushes and use this all as a non-developer. So what's that really good for? Any sort of automations, they're really easy to get started, particularly things like Zapier. And again, you can build this logic by chaining a bunch of them together. What is this not as great for? Data syncing, particularly two-way. So for all the reasons we just talked about, you can architect or try to architect things with Zapier and Integromat that mimic sort of syncing, but it's typically very brittle. It often takes a lot of time to set up. And again, it is not by fault of these tools. It's more that they weren't really built. If you think about the developer world, right, like this type of one-way push is not really what makes it easy to do things like data syncing. This is also a problem for data is changing frequently. These are often not real-time updates. They happen maybe every once a minute or once every 5 minutes. And another issue is if you have data that's already in one spot and you want it to all in bulk be in another spot, typically these tools work off of a trigger. And so it doesn't necessarily play well with that sort of setup. So native integrations. So a lot of these tools are building native integrations into their own app, and things like Airtable, Notion, Coda are really the ones that are pushing things forward here. So if you go into Airtable, I can even show really quickly. If you come to Airtable, right, and you want to click import, you can start to import data from all these different services, right? And so that is one of their again native integrations. It's really easy because they have built it natively into the app, right? You don't have to connect a third-party tool. You can just simply click and you're good to go. By the nature of this, it is built for no coders. You don't need to be a developer, and you can get data from other apps into Airtable or Notion or Coda or whatever else. Typically, these in-house integrations are still one way. Occasionally, you'll see some sort of two-way thing. But again, these are two-way becomes a lot more complex for these tools. They're trying to also create some sort of breadth. And so often you'll see this as a one-way. And again, breadth of integrations, it's not nearly going to be anything like Zapier's 5,000 integrations, right, built into Airtable or Webflow or whatnot. But they're typically not going to launch this without at least 5 or 6. And you look at Airtable, right, that's 20 plus there. Notion's got, I think, 25, something like that. So again, you get a little more breadth, tons of simplicity, but typically only one way. So what is that good for? I mean, the main thing, right, is you get to work with data natively from other tools in the tool that you want. So if you are an Airtable fan, it's really easy. Just pump that data in, you're good to go. And again, it really works well if you happen to be needing data from one of these 25 or so sources. The thing it's not great for is pushing data out of the tool. So while it's really easy to import data, let's say, again, I'm using Airtable as an example, it's similar across all these. If you want to import data into Sheets, great. If you want to make updates here, create records, right? Delete records, pushing that back out into, example, Google Sheets or Salesforce, right? Is not typically what these things are built for. And again, it's a little limited, right, in terms of how many integrations these tools can afford to build. They're not going to build the long tail the way that Zapier has. ETL. Okay. So if you're not familiar with ETL, totally understandable. This is typically a developer term. It stands for extract, transform, load. And the idea is that when you are a larger company, we're talking, typically 100 employees plus, that sort of size, you typically hire data analysts, data scientists to build data pipelines that pull all your data from across all the apps you use into a data warehouse. And so the process of bringing that data from, let's say, Salesforce and HubSpot and maybe Airtable into your data warehouse is typically ETL, extract, transform, load. You're extracting data from Salesforce, HubSpot, et cetera, transforming it into a format that your data warehouse can comprehend, and finally loading that into the data warehouse. And so this is typically very developer focused. They're starting to become a little more UI based, and so no coders, or at least low coders really can start to use them as well. But the whole process really isn't built right now for the typical no code crowd. This is very much one way. This is not built for two way. It's really just about getting the data out of your apps and into your data warehouse. But on the benefit side, these tools also have a lot of breadth in terms of integrations. So if you look at Fivetran and Airbyte, these are two big players in the space. They have hundreds of integrations that are built into their system. So again, what is that good for? If you're a big company, if you're a developer, and specifically you want to pull data into your warehouse, often for running an analysis, ETL is the bread and butter tool to go do that. And things like high touch, which is this third icon here, are what's called reverse ETL. So you can take that data and push it back out into your apps. But again, that is not about real-time data syncing. It's really about pulling it into the warehouse, running analysis, and then maybe pushing a bit of it back to your tools. What it's not as good for is, no coders, right? The people that are in this room, or at least people like myself, right, that are building apps with Bubble, building things with Wix and Weebly and Webflow, right? That's not really what ETL is built for. And if you're an early stage startup, again, talking about seed stage, you're typically not investing into an ETL data pipeline, that early on. And the other piece is just, it's really not built, again, for two-way syncing. It's really just one way into your warehouse. Two more here to give just the overview. So vertical sync. You may be familiar with something like Noble. The FinSuite guys, if you're familiar with Webflow, have built this app. It syncs data between Airtable and Webflow. And it is really syncing. It's not just about a one-way automation or one-way push. It's mirroring data from one place being Airtable to another place being Webflow. The reason I call it vertical sync here is it is truly just between those two tools. When we talk about breadth of integrations, it is all the way to the left here because we're just picking two things. They're syncing between the two and making that really easy. So this one is called FinTable, which I believe is your bank account and Airtable. And then finally here, we're talking about Notion Google Calendar Sync, which is, I think, an indie developer as well that's gone ahead and just built a sync between these two tools specifically. All three of these, and there's a handful of others, are all no code specific. And again, this is really popped up just in the last few years where a lot of these things didn't exist. People realized that syncing was necessary and goes beyond something like Zapier. And often indie developers have gone ahead and built these vertical sync products. So really great if you happen to be needing sync just between those two tools. And also great if you like working with indie developers and teams. This is a really common indie project or company because you're fulfilling a niche problem and often doing it well because you're just picking these two tools. It's not as great for use cases that fall outside of just those two tools, right? And it's also just not as great for two-way syncing if that's something you need, because two-way sync typically involves a little bit more complex engineering. And most of these, again, indie developer teams just don't have the bandwidth to go and build that. So I'll wrap up here. So finally, true data syncing. That is when you take two different tools or more than two different tools and sync them in real time across the two. This is Whalesync at the top. The other one is Unito, which you may have heard. I think they just raised a Series B recently. And essentially, these tools are built for no coders. They're built to be two-way. They are again, different than Zapier, different than Integromat. They're truly about mirroring data across 2 or more different apps. In terms of breadth of integrations, neither of us and any other tool that exists in the space really has the same level of breadth that something like Zapier or Make has, because it is typically a much more complex or intense integration. In order to get two-way sync to work, you need to build a lot of these sort of edges that something like a lighter one-way sync tool would not have to do. That being said, they have more breadth than the vertical sync tools, which again are focused on just 2. So I mentioned the 5 that we have. Over the next year, we'll be building many more integrations. I think Unito has something like 25 or 30 integrations. So again, it's somewhere in between there. So great for two-way syncing, great for real-time updates, great if your data is changing a lot, right? If you're in Zapier and your data changes all the time, that's going to run up all your automation quota really, really quickly. With these syncing tools, they typically don't charge, or at least we don't charge on the number of changes that happen, because again, that's built into the idea of syncing, that your data will change and we're just going to keep it in sync all the time. And again, really great for teams that are doing work across multiple tools. If your team is in Jira, let's say your engineering team works in Jira, your marketing team works in Asana, these tools let you share that data across the 2. Not as this sort of set is not as good for building your own custom logic. Again, these are really good at mirroring data, not good at building sort of the really flexible, if this and that sets of statements that Zapier is great at, and still not nearly as good for just the long tail integrations. Nothing exists quite like those other ones that have 5,000 integrations. So just to kind of put this all into a little bit of a quadrant, and again, I put a little caveat there, which is that you can use these quadrants to kind of tell whatever story you want, but to be fair here, this should be in line with everything we just talked about, which is 2 ways at the top, 1 way at the bottom, developer tools on the left and no-code tools on the right. And you kind of see how this all splits, which you've got the ETL tools all the way on the left, which are 1-way developer tools. You've got the true data sync tools on the right, which are no-code tools that sync data 2-way. And then in the bottom right, where you've got 1-way no-code tools, you've got a mix of both the vertical integrations as well as the native integrations. So finally here, what's next? Where are we going with this? Again, this has really expanded and changed over the last really year or 2. I expect all of these things to just get better and start to converge, right? So the automation tools are going to become even more flexible in logic. They might even build their own syncing. You look at what Zapier's done with sort of the, I think it's their beta product about pushes, batch pushes. They'll probably move into syncing over time. The native integrations like Airtable, Sync, right? They're just going to add more and more integrations. Again, I showed that Airtable has about 25. I expect over the next year or 2, they'll probably bump that up to 50 or something around that. Again, they want to be the center of the universe for your data. And so the more that they can build these integrations, the better. ETL is going to become more and more no-code friendly. It has been traditionally a developer-focused product, but again, UI is not just good for no-coders, it's good for developers as well. And so I expect them to push more and more in that direction. Vertical sync, more and more of these products will enter the market, right? So FinSuite has Noble, Coda has a bunch of these packs that sync data from one place to another. Because it is a great niche product, like I mentioned, I expect more and more to be built. And then finally, true data sync, what Whalesync is working on. The big limiter right now is just the number of integrations, and we'll be expanding that, and I expect Unito to do the same. So before going into a demo, I'll just pause there on the presentation. Hope that gave a good overview of the state of no-code data syncing.
That was awesome. Thanks, Matthew. Does anyone have a question before Matthew moves on to a demo? No? All clear? I have one. Oh, there we go. What about the speed and less pipeline?
The speed and less pipeline. Do you mind, do you mean?
Expand on that, Asil. Asil, do you want to pop your audio on, or just give us, not quite sure what the speed and less what you mean by less pipeline?
Yes, hi. I'm just asking about when you transferring the data between the platforms or as you say, you compare between all these platforms. What do you think it is more speed and more efficient, and it is less complicated? I don't know if it is clear.
You're saying between the different options that I talked about, which one's sort of the fastest?
Yes.
Yeah. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. And maybe I'll just share really quickly to pull up that slide again. Let's see, here we go. Okay, cool. So just looking at across these, right? If you are, when I say real-time syncing, so if you need to, let's take Airtable and Google Sheets, right? Let's say every time you make an update in Airtable, you want it to immediately show up in Google Sheets, right? That's something where True Data Sync is going to be really, really useful. These tools are typically looking at the apps you've connected and trying to sync them as soon as possible, right? And so that's really nice, whereas some of these automation tools are working on more of a batch schedule, which is they'll look every 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes and sync from there. So that's one piece. On the other hand, if you are trying to take like if you're a large organization, you're trying to take a ton of data, and the goal is to get it into a data warehouse, right? All these other tools out there, True Data Sync, Vertical Sync, automation tools, they're just, again, you could try to use them for that, but it's not what they're built for. And so despite being a developer tool, they're going to be the simplest when it comes to that use case. So I guess what at a high level, what I'm trying to say here is what is easiest and what is fastest really depends on what you're trying to accomplish.
Is it fair to say, Matthew, as well, because with the True Data Sync, if I understood, when I was looking at sync tools, and full disclosure, we are a customer of Whalesync. It's one of the ways in which I met Matthew. But the Unito for their lower cost, for example, package do a batch processing, right? I think it's every 5 minutes. So even in True Data Sync, there's a different way to actually manage that, whereas Whalesync pushes through anything on either side that happens when it happens, right? Because I know I got confused with you guys when and sent you a message about it because of the fact that there wasn't a sync done for a certain amount of time, but it wasn't because you do it regularly. It was simply because none of the data had changed and therefore it didn't sync, which is, you know, an obvious thing when you think about it. But is that fair to say that even inside those spaces, in terms of the speed of the sync, it just depends on the tool that you use, right?
That's very true. And I'll say, and again, this is our in some ways direct competitor, but just to give you an example, right? Like you look at their personal plan, it starts at a 15-minute update time, and then a 5-minute uptime time. I think it's not until you get to their company plan where you start to get live updates from them. So yeah, you're very
price hike there.
Yeah, a little bit of a jump there. But just for us, you know, we do real-time or live updates across all our plans. But yes, you're 100% right, which is that even within True Data Sync, it depends on which plan you're on to think about the speed.
Right, and it kind of ties in with what my question was going to be, which is around, you talked about the future, and I was actually going to ask what's the future for Whalesync? Is it more is it widening out the horizontal, or is it, you know, looking at features within the various verticals or whatever? But you answered that in your presentation in terms of widening out the horizontal, which is great and makes sense, especially in the way no code's going, getting more and more, you could say more and more you know, there's more and more tools coming out to do more and more sort of micro elements all the time, so you want to kind of keep those things you know, in sync. But what about scale in terms of like size of data, for example? I mean, obviously you're not doing data storage, right? So it's purely taking data from one tool to another. You're not storing it anywhere. Is that right to say?
Well, so to clarify, actually, so we do store a copy of the data.
Okay.
And the reason being that in order to do two-way sync, or at least the way that our system does two-way sync, is we are looking at your data. Let's take Airtable and Webflow. We're looking at your data in Airtable, we're looking at your data in Webflow, and we're comparing, and we're trying to say, hey, has anything changed? If so, sync it across to the other. To know whether or not anything has changed, we keep a sort of a source of truth copy in the middle. So that's sort of the reason behind that.
So in terms of scaling, because I know you work also on a difference between Unito, if I understood rightly, is that you kind of almost choose which things to keep up to date on their systems, whereas yours is like I mean, you can choose whether to or not, but yours is done on a number of rows, right? So in terms of like scaling from let's say the thing that popped in my head actually was something someone mentioned recently to us in our chat about a system that they had where they were logging transactions, and I think they were financial transactions, but there was literally like, you know, hundreds of thousands to millions of bits of data that they wanted to sync. Is that the kind of thing that the no-code tool like Whalesync could do at the moment, or is it better to be looking more at the ETL or you know?
Yeah. So I would say at the moment right now, we typically don't deal with customers in the millions. It's in the hundreds of thousands is probably where I would say our larger customers are at. That being said, you're spot on, which is that just as we grow over the next year or so, we want to be able to support more and more of these, you know, large data types of use cases. And so we'll be investing into that for sure. I'll also mention basically that the one sort of just thing to maybe or take some time for people to wrap their head around is just the difference between the way that we price, like you mentioned, around records versus like Zapier and Make, which price around automations. So if you have data in Whalesync, that data can change as much as you want, right? It doesn't matter. It could change every second, all the time. That's not really a problem. It's just a matter of how much total data is in the system. Slightly different from the automation tools.
And from a customer point of view, again, just giving a real life use case, I can attest to how we actually found Whalesync was we were looking at a more vertical system. I don't even remember the name, so I won't mention it, but more because I can't remember, to sync Webflow data to Airtable and vice versa. But we were syncing, like, we've got a number of microsites that we're syncing events across. So we had like 6 different sites which we wanted to come from one Airtable database because we do all of our events in one place, but they're promoted in different sites. And the vertical one that we found, that their pricing, the only way they did their pricing was you know, $29 or something, around the same price as Whalesync per site. So it was on the basis of each site that you're syncing. And so Whalesync was just perfect on the basis that we were paying that same kind of price, but we could do as many sites as we want, pretty much, knowing that we were only probably syncing like 5 or 6 items a week kind of thing. So it's across the whole lot. So in that sense, you know, again, if you're using lots of different instances of no code tools, that's where we found Whalesync to be absolutely invaluable and really affordable, being the main point. But that's just for everyone's benefit, a real life example. Cool, thanks, Matthew. Do you want to tell us give us a bit of a demo, and then yeah,
let's do it. And I'll say the hopefully, again, feel free to pause me. I hope that a lot of the things that we just talked about will come into view and as we go through the demo. But what I'm going to do here is basically, this is Whalesync, by the way, is show how to sync something really simple, which is this Airtable base with a couple blog posts into this Webflow site. And again, the beauty of Whalesync and the beauty of these sync tools in general is when you can take not like 5 blog posts, but imagine 5,000 records, right? And sync that in real time over into Webflow. But again, just for the sake of this example, we'll make it really simple. So what we'll do, just to show you how this is all set up, is we have this Airtable base. It's got a blog posts table, a categories table, and an authors table. And within it, it's got a couple records, right? These are our blog posts. So a name, an image, some data in it, right? Or some rich text here. Over in Webflow, we've got this really empty Webflow site, but with those same collections set up. So we've got our blog posts collection, authors collection, and categories collection. And if you go into each of them and look at the settings, all the same fields that we're seeing in Airtable, so name and image and post body, right? These are all existing here. And so once you have that set up, you're basically ready to go sync, right? Airtable and Webflow are going to be sharing the same data. And so you just need to make sure that they're architected and set up the same way. So over in Whalesync, I'll show you how to do this. It should be pretty familiar if you're familiar with Zapier and these other tools. But basically, create a base. Step one is just connecting your apps. So let's connect to Airtable. The way to do that is through an API key. So we can grab this guy over here like this and a base sharing link. So they have this little share button. You just grab that and you're good to go here. So that'll authorize Airtable. Once that is authorized, you can save that. Webflow will be even easier. You can just click Webflow, authorize, and pick your site. So we want to do our blog and authorize that. And now you're connected. So once you've connected to your apps, the next step is just mapping those tables. So like we talked about, we have that blog post categories and authors tables. Over here, they will show up in Whalesync. And so we're just going to say authors in Airtable, we want to sync with authors in Webflow and so on and so forth. Here in the middle, we can choose the sync direction, right? So if we only wanted to sync from Airtable to Webflow or vice versa, we could, but let's do two-way because that's sort of part of the beauty here. Finally, if we go over to map fields, it's a really similar idea, right? Which is that over in Airtable, we've got that name and image and post body, same for each of these other tables, right? Name and description and whatnot. We're just going to map those over in Whalesync. So we're going to say that in our authors table, we have a name field. We want that to be synced with the name field in our Webflow authors table. Same thing for all of these fields in the blog post table. What you'll notice also is that all of this is already done for us. And the reason for that is that I've named these fields exactly the same across the two. And so Whalesync is smart enough to know, hey, if you name them the same, you probably want them to be kept in sync. But you can also do things manually here, right? So we can add fields this way. And this will just show you what kind of field it is so you know what to map. Once you've mapped them all together, we can save. This gives you a nice little indication that you're good to go. And we can turn syncing on. Once sync is turned on, this will start to initialize, and then it'll count up all the updates that are happening. So again, we have data that's in Airtable. Right now, it's being synced into Webflow. As you see these updates counting down, again, they're syncing. And in another second, we will be all done. So we've synced everything. Let's go back over to Webflow. We'll refresh. And within a few seconds here, we have synced. So all of our blog posts are here in our Webflow site. Again, it's coming through this collection. It's working through the CMS. So you can take a look at them here. It's got all of that information that we wanted. And just to sort of see the two-way nature here, why don't we go ahead and add a new one? So let's do, let's see, no code northeast is great. And we made this one in Webflow. And we can go ahead and publish that. And once Webflow publishes that, you will obviously, if you're familiar with Webflow, see it on the Webflow side, right? We've created data here. But the cool thing is that if we come back over to Airtable, and we can look at Whalesync for a sec here, this will sync, right? So this just synced. We come over to Webflow, or sorry, Airtable, we refresh that, and boom, instantly we've got no code northeast is great. This is all appearing. So that is the very quick demo. I'll show one for Airtable to Airtable as well. But maybe just pausing there. Yeah, any questions around two-way data sync between Airtable and Webflow?
Can you connect more than two to three-way sync or four-way sync?
Good question. So the way that you can do that now is that you can set up multiple of these. So like each base here is between just two tools, but we could then take this Airtable base, and maybe we'll do it in a sec actually, just to show how it works, and connect it again to another one, right? And you can kind of chain them. That being said, eventually, and I don't know if this will be a year from now or when, but eventually we'd love to just let it all be as part of one base where you can connect 3 or 5 or 10 and do 10-way syncing. Cool. So why don't we do, yeah, just to kind of show it, why don't we do a example of this. We'll chain another one to this. So let's do my blog. Let's duplicate this. We're not going to duplicate the records, and we'll do chained blog duplicate base. Cool. Let's open that up. So now we've got the same thing. And let's say we make one called I made this blog post in my chain blog. And that. And let's see, what images do we have here? We'll give it a Websync cover. Okay, cool. So if we come back over here to Whalesync, we can create a new one. Let's do Airtable. We'll authorize. Let's do our original one here. Grab the base sharing link. And again, this should be familiar, same idea of just authorizing. So this is the original base in Airtable. We've connected that. Let's do another one here. Same API key, but this time, this time let's grab this new chain blog, turn this on like that, and authorize and save. Cool. So for this one, it's going to map all three of these together again. It's going to map all the fields together. Cool. This is all good. Save. Turn this guy on. Turn on data syncing. So we've now sort of chained a third base onto this. You're seeing some updates happen here. Because we did two-way sync, it is going to take all the data that's in the original, right, and start to create the records into this new one. And then it's going to take this one that I made here, I made this in the chain blog, and sync it back into the original. And then, because we have the original base set up, this new one in Airtable should make its way over to Webflow as well. So let's say what we got here. Here we go. I made this blog post in my chain blog. So that's a good example of, and I think Adam, sort of the type of thing that you were doing as well, which is creating these syncs that work across multiple tools, not just one-to-one, but even across three or more.
Yeah, our use case was that all of our events are created in Eventbrite, and we want to be able to track who's coming to events, so we can see where people are working with us through our CRM, which is an Airtable based CRM. So all of our Eventbrite data comes into the CRM, but then we also promote those events on different websites. So we want to be able to get that information out into different places. And so for each site, we just create a Whalesync sync that syncs the various events from the Airtable database that have been created in Eventbrite out to the website. So it means that we just have to create events in Eventbrite effectively, and the whole system does what it needs to do and publishes the events on the website when they need to be published, and captures the data about who's attending and what have you in the CRM.
Nice.
So yeah, it works pretty well. But it's there's I mean, I think one of the biggest things we've found, but I believe, Matthew, you're working on this if you haven't already known the speed that you guys seem to knock features out. But obviously, we have to filter off specific events to each website. So we have to create a view in Airtable that filters out the websites. And the view means that it's only a one-way sync, if I remember rightly. So that's one slight issue. But to be honest with you, all we have to know is that we need to edit our events in the CRM, not in the websites, and it's fine, which we would do anyway because it could be on multiple websites, so it makes much more sense to do that. So it kind of works for us. Once you get your Eventbrite sync, then we're in dream territory, because then we can just update them up on Eventbrite and everything's updated. But yeah, no, it's we found it a really cool tool. We've used it for other things now as well, because we're using an Airtable CRM. we're starting to use Notion, and we were using a lot of the same data, like projects, for example. So we'd have projects in our CRM, which are built, that's where they started, because it's all done actually on Stacker. So projects are created into Airtable. But then we've been using Notion, and we want to use that, but we want to be able to reference the projects. And so we were creating a separate database of projects in Notion. And since the Whalesync Notion sync came out, then now we can sync, you know, all of the stuff that we're creating in Stacker gets synced across the Notion. So all our documentation is now in sync with our CRM through an Airtable backend without anyone actually going to Airtable or having to use a kind of database system. They do it all through user interfaces. So yeah, it's pretty. It's really cool. And as I said, most of the things you could as you said, more importantly at the start, most things you could kind of hack together in some way, shape, or form. What Whalesync's done for us is really make it A, super easy, but also B, make it that two-way sync, which is just you know, it's much harder to do in other systems from what we found. So yeah, it was a joy when we found you guys.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I'll say one last thing, which is like, I think a lot of people, they see this type of technology, whether it's data syncing or even automations, and go, okay, I see how this works, but like, why? Like, what can I do with this? What does this really change for me? And it sounds like, Ian, you found a few different reasons for you. I'll just share, to try to answer that question a little bit, which is if you come over to the Whalesync website and you look at the use cases, you can see a couple of these that are really popular. A big one, if you are familiar with Airtable and Webflow, is programmatic SEO. So you can use Whalesync in the same way we just did with blog posts to create thousands of SEO landing pages. And what I mean by that is if we Google, sync, Notion, and Bubble, right? Whalesync come up here as the second result, I think right below Zapier. And the way that we do that is we've used Whalesync ourselves in an Airtable and Webflow to create this programmatic page, right? So all of these things here, so sync, Bubble, and Notion, this is just a templated page, right? And this is filled in for every combination of tools. So if we went to like connectors here and we go to, instead we did, let's say Webflow, and we look at Webflow and Google Sheets, right? We've got another page that looks exactly the same, but with those tools. And so that's our use case for it. Zapier obviously does the same thing with theirs. And so that's a really popular use case with these tools that becomes enabled because you're using a true data sync tool as opposed to something like automations. So that's one. I mentioned, I won't go through all of them, but just internal tools, no-code apps. We also have this template packs page. You can kind of quickly copy some of these things and get started as well. So job boards is another really popular one. But again, just trying to paint a little bit of a picture of, all right, I know what data syncing is now. What do I do with it? Hopefully that helps a little bit.
It doesn't surprise me on that templates one that virtually all of them had Airtable in there, because I think it's also that thing of having one without using a data store, having one source of data, right? It's and being able to keep that in sync. That's certainly been our case at least. Do you want to just quickly mention, Matthew, just because I think it's relevant, the stacks as well, no-code stacks?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. I'll share real quick. So we try to launch different little tools aside from Whalesync, but just different things that we think might be helpful. One of those things we launched, I think about 2 months ago now, is something called no-code stacks. So essentially, we collected a lot of data on what are the tools that other companies are using, and anonymized that, and are sharing it now through this no-code stacks. So essentially, it's totally free. The only thing we ask is that you help contribute to the knowledge base by sharing what your stack is, right? What are the tools that you're using? And once you do, you can get access to the full database of tools that different startups are using, categorized by size and industry, and a few of these insights, right? So exactly like what here's a good example of most of these startups at least in our database are using Zapier, but Make and NAN are obviously out there. So anyway, feel free to check it out. It's totally free, and hope that's useful as well.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, I just thought that's right. I'm going to be talking about that tomorrow in a session where we're looking at no-code app development. And I think it's when you're just getting started, what I think is really useful if you're just getting started in no-code is to look at the way different people are doing different things, right? And it's just, there's so much choice out there, so many tools out there, doing so many different things in different ways that it's just useful to be able to see how other people are doing it. So great stuff. Does anyone have any questions for Matthew?
I had another one, which I'm just wondering how it deals with conflict. So what happens if someone edits the data at both ends at the same time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way that it works essentially is it's totally time-based. So down to like the millisecond. So if someone changes on one side, that's going to get essentially queued into the system to make an update. And then if someone edits on the other side, that'll get queued as well. And so really it's just whoever made the update last, that'll be synced across to the other side. And sorry, maybe just even to elaborate, like you'll literally see, like if someone changes on one side in 1 second, and then someone changes on the other side a second later, this will update here, make the change, and then be overridden, and then make the change back to the other side.
But so if two people are trying to edit exactly the same thing in a different way, is it the person who does it second that wins then?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Better. Well, you said it better than me.
I like that you made that a battle, William. It's like, who's going to win? You're both sitting there trying to do the last bit, right? A game of chicken on a sync here.
We might need to pivot into video games. That could be a new use case.
Yeah.
Brings a whole new thought to the arcade conference. No, we could all just be seeing who syncs faster. But it's that weird one of the fact that actually you've got to be last, right, to be first. It's yeah. Anyway, cool. Any other questions for Matthew?
Yeah. Is audio working?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to ask the same question as William, but I think I just want to confirm my understanding of it a little bit, so that what's synced is treated as a single unit. So if one person is editing a title of an event on one system, someone else is editing the body on the other system, then do they get merged, or does the later one completely override the first one? So if somebody submits their title first, then somebody else submits their body somewhere else, will the title, the old title that they had, get overwritten on that, or do they all kind of get merged? I'm coming at this from a sort of code point of view, where lots of people can work on the same bit of code in Git, push it all in, Git goes, oh, bit of this, bit of that, and merges it all together and knows exactly what.
Yeah,
how to merge stuff. Just wondering sort of how clever this two-way sync is, because it's a hard problem to solve. I know that.
Well, I appreciate it. It has been a harder problem than I think we even realized when we started the company. Just from a technical standpoint, it is. We were like, when we started this, we were like, how come no one has built this? This is crazy. And then we're like, oh, okay, I think we know why. It's like, but yeah, no. So it'll merge things, right? So unlike some of these automation tools that are or even some of the vertical sync tools, right, that are working in like a batch override sort of way, which is like we're taking this data and every minute just like dumping it into the other place. We work much more on a record by record. We sync something across and then we associate the two. And so we know this record in Airtable is associated with this specific record in Webflow. And so when you make a change here, sync that specifically to there and don't worry about the rest. And same with each of those specific fields. So if you change just the name field, right, we're not going to update the rest of the fields. We'll just update the name field.
Right. So it works on individual fields. That sounds good. That sounds great. Okay, thank you.
Super. Any other questions? I'm conscious that I said in the email today that we'd get through it in about an hour, and it is really not like me to be on, well, not that it's really me, it's Matthew, but for us to be on time is fantastic. Matthew, thanks so much for that. Really, it's been great, really interesting, and I think hopefully it's opened eyes to no code sync and also having the recording there and putting that on YouTube. I think there'll be other people interested. So really appreciate it, and especially with the time difference and everything, it's appreciated. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, this is really fun, and thanks for having me. And again, if anyone has any questions, always feel free to shoot me an email. It's just Matthew@whalesync.com.
Great stuff. Super. I'll be uploading this onto YouTube for everyone, and we'll send out a link when that's done, both on Slack and through email. The email will probably come a little bit later, depending on how quickly we get this date sorted for January to announce that. The January meetup, I didn't actually mention it before, but the January meetup will probably be a little bit later this, rather than doing it on what I think is the 3rd or something like that. Don't want to melt everyone just getting back after New Year. So we'll probably look to do it the 2nd week, or possibly even push it into the 3rd and then do our next one at the start of March. But we'll see what date we can finalize. But I'll let everyone know through the mail list. So if you're not already signed up, if you just go to nocodenortheast.com and just sign up through there. It's just a MailChimp sign up system. So yeah, otherwise, have a great festive period, everyone. I won't see you. I know it's a bit too soon for some people, but very happy Christmas and New Year and what have you. And thanks for coming. And we'll see you at the next one in January, hopefully in person.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Matthew. Take care, everyone.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Thanks very much.
Merry Christmas.